There are two social planets, Jupiter, the great benefic, and Saturn, which has been known as the malefic of the zodiac. A benefic is associated with good results that happen easily. A malefic is considered a negative force. Until astrology became a modern psychological tool, there was a general attitude that the chart unfolded in a certain way, regardless of what you thought. Saturn was the outmost planet. As such, he was called both the Lord of Karma and the dweller of the threshold. Like fate, he had the final say. Saturn was given a lot of power and control, and when things didn't work out, he was called a malefic. Is he? Let's see if his mythology tells us the answer to that age-old question. Saturn is a child of Uranus. Uranus is a bit of a jerk, so Saturn and his mother plan to take the throne. Saturn does the dirty work. He uses his sickle to castrate his father, lopping off the organ associated with fertility and creativity. This desire Saturn has to shut down the creative, the part associated with growth, is seen again when Saturn himself is king. He receives a prophecy that alerts him that what he did to his father is going to be done to him by one of his own offspring. So as each of his children is born, he eats them. His wife, Rhea, grows tired of this. So when Jupiter's born, she puts a stone in baby clothes, and Saturn swallows that. Meanwhile, Jupiter is whisked away and raised on an island. And when he's mature enough, he indeed comes back to topple Saturn from the throne. That takeover includes making Saturn throw up his other children. They'd never been digested. Once they were out, they joined forces with Jupiter, and Saturn's days were numbered. These stories tell us a lot about the nature of Saturn. The first time we really see him, he's removing the organ of creativity and progeny from his father. And then when he's grown, he eats his creation, his children, the thing that would live after him. This tells us there's something limiting, restricting, and fearful about Saturn in myth and in the birth chart. This is the part of the psyche that would rather not have the expansive brightness of growth, because in the end, you can't control growth. Anything could happen. We can learn something else from one particular detail of this story. He eats his children, but he doesn't digest them. They're still alive and fully formed, just contained in his belly. This tells us that within the human mind, you can crush and stifle your creativity almost to nothing. But no matter how you try, you can't extinguish it completely. Some of it lives. And that is because living itself is a creative endeavor. In every single second that you breathe, you're creating something. So even in the most extreme cases, Saturn can't kill all the light. And until you digest something fully, it's not part of you, and you can always lose it. That's true of Saturn's children, of information, of experiences, and of insights. As we look a little deeper into this story, it's kind of funny, isn't it, that Saturn was fooled so easily into eating that stone. Considering how dramatic a moment it is to eat your child, he wasn't paying much attention. We can imagine that as Rhea was robbed of each of her children, she was growing more and more upset. But Saturn wasn't reading her. He might have succeeded if he had been more conscientious and present, and his idea had been sound, or he had reevaluated it. From these stories, we can surmise that Saturn is a place in the chart where we're a bit dense. Yes, people don't even usually realize that. So, when looked at from a more nuanced viewpoint, Saturn isn't bad, negative, or malefic. It's simply a force that requires more focus, concentration, consciousness, skill, and management of fear. In order for your Saturn to function properly, you have to take it seriously and be responsible. Longevity of effort is everything when it comes to Saturn. Discipline, steadiness. As you can tell from the myths alone, Saturn isn't the most creative planet in the zodiac. One of his primary roles is actually the opposite: preservation, conservation, protecting what you've already built. You can see the steadiness and persistence of Saturn in its glyph. Here we have a scythe, some say a plow. Either goes back to the soily roots of the god of agriculture. Then there's the heavy cross of matter and a curving line that pulls you down, down toward the earth. See, even the symbol for Saturn is safe rather than being abstract, and it embodies perfectly its traditional nature. Saturn is the most establishment-oriented planet because of the desire to keep things as they are. Every planet in the chart has the same idea: the fulfillment and wholeness of the sun. And one of the reasons that Saturn's gotten a bad rap is because of the process he takes. You see, Saturn knows something about us. It's been true for 200,000 years, and it's true today. Humans are motivated by pain and feelings of constriction. And as long as that remains true, he'll keep using them. When something becomes so suffocating and anguished that we'll do anything to get out, Saturn's behind it. He brings poverty and lack and desolation as a way to make us conscious and more fulfilled. Saturn knows that pain has an educational value. Through Saturn's experiences, we discover inner strength and self-knowledge, which adds up to the most important thing on this plane of existence: psychological freedom. Saturn offers us a better, deeper, richer, more purposeful, and more meaningful life. He makes us reevaluate ourselves, especially by separating our individual values from those imposed upon us from the outside. Through extreme deprivation, we may find out that we've been following a value that we don't value much at all. Saturn causes us to develop internal values and an internal reality that he then preserves for all time. Saturn tests each one of us throughout our lives. You find the greatest number of tests surrounding the issues associated with the house in which your natal Saturn sits. Saturn's natal placement also shows the area of life in which you've generally been disadvantaged or impoverished and have feelings of insecurity, and where circumstances tend to be painful by happenstance rather than by any personal failing of the individual. The natal placement of Saturn is generally where in life you feel you were given a raw deal from the start, where you have to work harder than everyone else for less of a reward, and where you're most likely to feel unlucky or even cursed. Saturn causes us to feel thwarted, frustrated, and unable to express ourselves. For instance, Saturn in the second house might be associated with being born into poverty, where a relationship with possessions or expressing likes and appreciation and an aesthetic sense via shopping was impossible. Saturn in the fifth might never get to be a child because the father was absent and the mother was a narcissist with an emotional age of 3. Saturn in the fourth might be from a proper family that was emotionally cold. Saturn in the eighth covers things like religious repression of sexuality or even being controlled by a trust fund. Not just the house, but also the sign in which Saturn is found colors the childhood circumstances. Saturn also moves through your houses by transit and brings more tests into whatever area of life it touches. Saturn transits can be frustrating because they bring in situations for which you feel unprepared. The pattern is to remove your resources methodically, the way a goat climbs, sometimes until you're truly left with nothing. I've often felt like my life was on a chopping block during particularly hard Saturn transits, and that he had a cleaver in his hand, lopping off anything that wasn't essential. Saturn showed me what I could live without, and that is virtually everything I want, do, and think. Saturn brings you to a point where you must look inside to find what you thought was outside. In this way, he has quite an introverted nature, and the inflexibility ascribed to Saturn usually has to do with people fighting the inevitable, the uncompromising end. But Saturn is never going to stop until you learn the lesson. In fact, if you're particularly hard-headed, circumstances will get more austere and you'll be backed into a smaller and smaller corner until you finally say uncle and have the realization, or you release the trouble, or you make the change he has in mind for you. Saturn can bring difficulties for which you are clearly responsible. No question, anyone can see it. Other times, it's difficult to discern the connection. It's hard to find anything that the individual did to bring about a trying event. But the outcomes of Saturn's tests are often in your hands, and your reaction to those outcomes are 100% in your hands. We're drifting into the concept of fate, so this is the last thing I'll touch on. Through most of astrology's history, Saturn's nickname, it was the keeper of the keys of the gate. And he's still the keeper of the keys because it's through Saturn in our chart that we ultimately attain self-discovery. It's through mastery of the real three-dimensional world that we end up not only finding satisfaction and contentment, but that we're also able to move to a higher level of consciousness. Our reaction to Saturn's reality-based world is how we can tell where our consciousness is. Jupiter's benefic gifts don't tell us where we are spiritually. Saturn's difficult tests do. It's easy to be peaceful and generous and beautiful when all is going well, when there's a big harvest at your feet, and all your work has funneled perfectly into the amount of reward you expected it to bring, maybe more. But what really tells your level of consciousness is how you react when one of Saturn's unfair tests comes your way. That's where Saturn fits in the spiritual arena. He brings those moments of revelation where, over time and under pressure, the true self and the true level of spiritual awareness is revealed. Thank you for watching Secrets from an Astrologer's Desk, Learning Astrology, Lesson 13, The Meaning of Saturn. Stay tuned for all the ways you can get in touch for a birth chart reading and full astrological services. I'm Joy, Saturn through the fire signs to come.